The day my daughter was married, I found myself sitting alone on a narrow balcony where the staff had squeezed in a few spare tables for the overflow of guests. From there, the music drifted out, full and grand, while laughter and camera flashes filled the main hall. But all I could see were the backs of people's heads and the glint of crystal glasses catching the light. I was her mother, yet I had been placed in the shadows as though my presence was an afterthought, something to be tucked away politely. I said nothing. My chest ached, but I stayed silent. Memories of raising her, scraped knees, whispered comforts, long nights alone together, pressed in on me, but I swallowed the bitterness. Because I knew something none of them did. My late brother, the one man who had believed in me without condition, had left me the deeds to islands worth $85 million. No one at that wedding, not even my daughter's new husband, could have imagined such a thing. So as I sat there in my blue dress, my glass filled only with water, I stayed quiet about what I held. And it was a good choice because just 1 week later her groom appeared at my door with a lawyer by his side, demanding what he thought was his claim. But before I take you to that moment, I need to return to where it began. I am 69 years old, a widow of 10 years. My name is Eleanor Ward. I raised my daughter Clara, with every ounce of strength I had after her father died. I kept our home afloat, set aside my own ambitions, and carried burdens no one ever thanked me for. People see gray hair and a quiet posture and assume weakness. They forget that silence can be its own kind of shield. That night, outside on the balcony table that wobbled against the stone, with a cold draft curling under the drapes, I sat in the place someone decided would be good enough for me. And I smiled as if it didn't sting. I watched Clara promise her forever to Daniel. I told myself not to ruin her moment, even if it meant disappearing from it. Mothers notice everything, though most pretend we don't. I noticed Daniel's grin growing brighter for the photographers than for her. I noticed how his mother, Beatrice, took her seat in the very front row as though the entire event revolved around her. And I noticed no one cared that I sat outside in the chill, my fingertips wrapped around a glass of water. That day I was the invisible mother. But invisibility carries power. When no one looks at you, you are free to look at them, and what I saw reminded me why my secret had to stay locked inside. My brother Richard had been larger than life, brilliant, stubborn, endlessly driven. He had no family of his own, so I was the one he leaned on when illness came. In those final months, when cancer carved away at his strength, he pulled me close and whispered, "Ellie, they will try everything: charm, guilt, pressure. Don't give in. These islands aren't trophies. They're meant to protect you. Use them wisely." I promised him I would. And so, on Clara's wedding day, with everyone watching the aisle and no one noticing me, I kept my lips sealed. I didn't tell Beatrice or Daniel's polished friends, or anyone else, that the woman sitting outside with only a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders held paperwork for islands worth more than the combined fortunes of everyone inside that glittering hall. I kept it to myself. I played the role of invisible because I understood that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And in the days that followed, that silence became my shield. Clara and Daniel went off on their brief honeymoon, smiling into cameras, filling their feeds with filtered pictures of champagne toasts and sunsets. But beneath the sparkle, I could feel something else pulsing. A truth I had suspected, though I had not yet seen it laid bare. That truth came walking straight up my driveway a week later, carrying a briefcase. When I opened the door that afternoon, Daniel stood there. His suit was tailored, but it fit him too tightly now, as though the fabric strained under his ambition. Beside him was a man with a lawyer's smile, polished, smooth, and practiced. He stepped into my kitchen as though it were already his and spread out a stack of documents across my table. "Just a bit of paperwork, Mrs. Ward," he said, his tone dripping with charm. "For your protection, for the family's security. All we need is your signature right here." I lowered the teacup I'd been holding, the steam curling between us like a question mark. At the top of the page, in bold, sat the words "Power of Attorney." In that instant, every warning Richard had given me snapped into place like puzzle pieces. My silence had kept me safe. But now it would have to become something more. A weapon. I stood at the table, eyes fixed on the papers the groom and his lawyer had left behind, the sunlight catching the thin steam rising from my tea. Before I reached for the phone to call my attorney, my mind traveled back to another room, another winter, and to the man who had trusted me above all others. Richard had always been the weather in our family, unpredictable, commanding, and impossible to ignore. He built companies the way other men built barns, with speed and muscle and precision. We were 10 years apart, yet he treated me as his partner long before I ever saw myself that way. When illness turned against him, I became his driver, his appointment keeper, his last witness. I remember the hospital light, how it flattened everything, even him. He wore a gray robe, his once broad frame diminished. One evening he opened a drawer and drew out a thin leather folder and a rolled nautical chart. His voice was weak but steady when he said, "Ellie, some people love power the way moths love light. Don't mistake flattery for love." He spread the chart across the blanket. Small green freckles marked the islands. Blue lines traced channels between them. In the margins he had written notes in his neat script. "Shallow reef here, osprey nest here, freshwater spring here." Then he took my hand, his eyes piercing despite the weight of his illness. "Do not turn this into a spectacle," he said. "Don't flaunt it, don't parade it around. This is armor, not a trophy." The leather folder held copies of deeds, trust documents, and a letter written in his sharp, square handwriting. Everything was already in place. Ownership structures simple for me to manage, but nearly impossible for anyone to steal. My name appeared where it needed to. A banker held packets in safekeeping, to be released only if I arrived with identification and recited a line from a poem we had loved since childhood. Richard had prepared it all the way he ran his businesses, with meticulous steps, safety nets, and no room for panic. Then, almost as an afterthought, he handed me something ordinary. A linen handkerchief stitched with our initials, R&E, in thread the color of the bay water where we grew up. That week I used it to wipe the sweat from his brow when fevers came. It held the faint scent of his cologne, cedar and pepper. "Keep it close," he whispered. "When people around you talk too loudly, hold it. Remember who you are. Remember what we built." After his death, I tucked the folder and the chart inside a fireproof box, hidden at the back of my closet behind winter blankets. I never spoke of it. Not to Clara. Not to anyone. And so, when Daniel Carter and his lawyer tried to corner me in my own kitchen, I already knew the power of silence, and just how dangerous it could be when I finally decided to speak. I kept the handkerchief in a small tin beside my tea, folded neatly into a square. Claire never asked about it. No one did. That was how Richard wanted things. Secrecy as a kind of moat. He was right. Wealth announced too soon behaves like blood in the water, drawing in those who would circle. So I told no one about the islands. Not my daughter. Not my neighbors. Not the kind women from church who brought me casseroles when my husband passed. Even those who love you can falter under pressure. Affection can wear the mask of urgency, devotion can disguise control. Richard understood how quickly the vulnerable can be coaxed into signing away what keeps them safe. He asked me to honor him not with pride but with discretion. There was another reason for my silence. The islands were never meant to be trophies stacked on a ledger. They were alive. On the chart, Richard had drawn a faint crescent where sea turtles crawl ashore at night. He marked a star at a bluff where the sunsets broke wide in gold. He circled the coves that needed to stay clean and shaded the mangroves that stitched the shoreline back together after storms. He wanted sanctuaries, not spectacles. So I learned to practice the discipline he left me: patience, order, silence. When I felt myself shrinking, I touched the handkerchief. When cornered, I traced the blue channels on his map until my breath steadied. That chart reminded me that land remembers. It carries a faith that people often forget. Standing in my kitchen now, I slid the lawyer's note beneath the leather folder where my truth rests. No one at the wedding had known that secrecy guarded me then. It would guard me again. I would not boast. I would protect. And when the moment came to respond, I would answer in the language Richard had taught me best. With signatures instead of speeches, boundaries instead of noise, a life defended quietly by the law. The venue itself was dressed like a magazine spread left open on a coffee table to suggest life bigger than it really is. Chandeliers spilled light down from the high ceiling. Roses twined up white arches. A string quartet rushed through Vivaldi as if haste could be mistaken for grace. Waiters in black moved like shadows, trays lifted high, the clink of champagne flutes bright as silver bells. Guests gathered beneath a glowing monogram while phones sparkled like a second constellation. From my chair on the side balcony, the celebration felt like something happening in another country. Everyone's faces pointed toward the spectacle. My seat pointed toward the draft. Inside, cameras blinked and clicked, swallowing every curated moment. The planner's voice hummed from her headset, her commands unquestioned. A violinist smiled faintly at the timeline taped to her stand. That night, image was everything. Breath, feeling, tenderness, they were afterthoughts. For Beatrice's family, it wasn't a wedding, it was a production. She moved with the quiet authority of a director, nudging photographers into position with a glance. Two uncles compared cufflinks, their laughter too loud. A cousin flaunted a watch the size of a compass. The best man rehearsed a speech that sounded more like a pitch deck than a toast. Even the cake glimmered with gold leaf as though sweetness needed a sponsor. Clara was beautiful. She always had a glow when she laughed, a light I'd noticed since she was small. But that night the room did not orbit her. It orbited an image of her, polished and staged. The planner maneuvered her from moment to moment. Smile here, tilt your chin there, let the roses frame you. He caught my eye once across the hall. I lifted my hand. A server moved between us and the moment slipped away. Later someone brought me a blanket. It seemed less an act of kindness than a correction. No venue wants a shivering figure in the margins of their photographs. I drew it around my shoulders and sat quietly, watching the candles flicker in their glass cylinders, steady flames trembling against the weight of spectacle. A memory rose without invitation and laid itself beside the glittering scene before me. I thought of a different hall long ago where I danced with my late husband after our small wedding. The wooden floor creaked under rented shoes, and the punch tasted faintly of sherbet left too long on ice. We had little money, but sincerity made the room glow. My mother held my bouquet when my fingers trembled from nerves. People knew my name. They called me forward to cut the cake. I was not perfect, but I was seen. The world then felt smaller, nearer. Or perhaps I simply belonged to it more fully. Now I sat tucked beside a fern and a space heater that hummed steadily. One of Daniel's cousins wandered over, snapped a photo, and assured me he'd cropped the heater out. I smiled and thanked him. Then I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and breathed in the draft that slipped under the drapes. I once stood at the center. Tonight I had been set along the edges. And that was the truth. It didn't break me. It revealed me. Daniel entered the room like a performer striking his cue. The bridal party whirled in a practiced routine, the quartet breaking into a pop melody dressed in strings. The room responded like an audience, not a family. When he reached Clara, he lifted her hand with a flourish aimed at the cameras. Their kiss unfolded with the timing of a logo reveal. I clapped, because clapping is part of a mother's duty, even when the applause feels like punctuation in someone else's script. Before the toasts, Beatrice approached with 2 planners trailing her like attendants. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder, the way one pats a household pet. "You're comfortable out here," she said smoothly. "It's quieter. You can rest." I smiled and answered that I was fine. I didn't mention the cold draft or the empty chair to my left, the one no one had tried to fill. Clara reached me just before the first dance, her veil snagged on a pin. She laughed, and I freed it with the same fingers that had mended dresses, hems, and broken hearts. "Mom, is the seat okay?" she asked, though her eyes were already searching for Daniel, who was adjusting his tie across the room. I told her yes. She squeezed my hands, then slipped back into the choreography of the night. That small exchange held the weight of our lives. Clara forever trying to please everyone, Daniel more manager than partner, and me wishing my daughter would step into joy without erasing herself in the process. Dinner arrived late at my table, the steak already cooled into politeness. I ate anyway. Cold food fills a body even if it leaves the heart empty. A server refilled my water and called me ma'am with a gentleness I decided to keep. Inside, the speeches began. They praised Daniel's vision, his ambition, his drive. When one of Clara's friends raised a glass to honor her kindness, the DJ cut them off with an upbeat song, as if tenderness might disrupt the evening's tempo. Laughter drowned the words that might have mattered. A distant aunt leaned over the balcony rail to ask where I'd found my dress. I told her I had taken in the waist myself. She nodded, more impressed by thrift than elegance, and then drifted back into the bright swirl of the room. From my place in the shadows, I read people the way sailors read a bay. I saw Daniel basking in applause like a man warming his hands by a heat lamp. I saw Beatrice measuring her family's prestige in camera angles and seating charts. I saw Clara shining like a lantern caught in wind, glowing but straining. Quietly, I prayed that her light would not imitate the storm surrounding her. I stayed silent. I held the blanket close, and beneath it, the edge of a linen handkerchief stitched with initials, R and E, in thread the color of sea water. Center or edge, I reminded myself I was still her mother. The night would end, and the truth would come in its own time. When the last sparkler fizzled into smoke and the glowing monogram flickered out, I folded the blanket neatly, thanked the staff, and walked the long path to the parking lot. I unlocked my car, sat behind the wheel for a breath, and steadied my hands until I was ready to drive home. The doorbell rang a week after the wedding, its sharp tone cutting through the quiet house. Eleanor Ward had just set water to boil when she saw, through the glass, her brother Richard standing on the porch. Beside him was a man in a tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase, his silver-framed glasses reflecting the late sun. Eleanor opened the door, stepping back just enough to be polite without inviting them in too freely. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Ward," the stranger said smoothly. "Edward Crowe, counsel. Richard and I hoped for a few minutes." Richard didn't wait for permission. He walked in as though the house were his, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. Crowe hovered at the threshold until Eleanor gave a small nod. She set cups on the table, poured tea for herself and slid plain water toward the two men. Richard barely pretended to sip before setting his glass down with a hollow clink. Crowe snapped open his briefcase and spread out a neat stack of papers bound by a blue strip. "General Durable Power of Attorney," he said, tapping the first page with his pen. "It's standard, proactive, efficient. With this in place, your family can assist you with financial and medical decisions if the need arises." Eleanor's eyes moved to the signature lines waiting at the bottom of the page. In one corner she saw the words, "Immediate and durable. Not springing. Not limited." Richard leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Clara is worried," he said. "We all are. This is for your peace of mind. You shouldn't be burdened with paperwork and decisions alone." Crowe slid a second copy toward her, marked with bright flags where she should initial and sign. "It will only take a moment," he added. Eleanor let the silence stretch until the kettle clicked cool behind her. She rested her hand lightly on the folded linen handkerchief beside her and felt the threads ground her. "I'll have my attorney review it first," she said evenly. The air shifted. Crowe's pen stilled. Richard's smile tightened like a rope pulled too far. "Of course," Crowe replied, but his tone lost its gloss. "We'll leave a copy." Eleanor skimmed the pages line by line. The authority was sweeping. Access to every account, the right to convey property, alter trusts, move funds, even change beneficiaries. No bond required. No accountability. Authority to act in one's own interest. She set the packet down with deliberate care. "How did you come to prepare this for me?" "It's a standard package we draft for responsible families," Crowe said quickly. "They retain us to keep their loved ones safe." "Who retained you?" Richard answered before Crowe could. "I did. As family." "Then you do not represent me," Eleanor said. "You represent whoever hired you." Crowe shifted. "For the purpose of this protective instrument, we serve the family unit." "That is not representation," she interrupted softly. "That is proximity." She set her teacup down, the porcelain ringing against wood like a gavel. "Leave your card. I'll pass it to my attorney." Richard tugged at his cuff, eyes scanning her hands for the pen that would not appear. "This feels adversarial, Eleanor. Claire wants harmony. No secrets. Harmony isn't achieved by rushing someone into signing papers," she said. "And privacy is not secrecy." Crowe tried again, his voice more insistent now. "We can limit the scope, make it springing, refine the classes of transactions. The goal is simplicity." "No," Eleanor said, pushing the stack back across the table. "The goal is control. Mine is clarity. There will be no signatures today." Richard leaned closer, his tone soft but edged. "I respect boundaries, but there is urgency. Taxes, accounts, obligations, things must be handled." "Whose obligations?" she asked. His eyes flickered. "Household matters. Wedding expenses. Strategic costs." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Those are not my obligations." Crowe uncapped his pen, then capped it again, the sound sharp as a clock tick. He slid a business card across the table. "Thank you," Eleanor Ward said, tucking it beneath a ceramic trivet. Email me a copy as well. Richard pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor. He planted both hands on the table, leaning in. I hope you won't make this harder than it needs to be. I hope you won't either, Eleanor replied, letting silence finish the thought for her. Crow gathered the papers into his briefcase with careful precision. We appreciate your time. We'll await contact from your counsel. At the door, Richard paused for one more attempt. Clara will be disappointed. Clara is my daughter, Eleanor said. She knows I think better after tea. His jaw tightened, but he gave a stiff nod and stepped out onto the porch. Crow followed, the briefcase gleaming under the afternoon light. Eleanor closed the door and latched it with the steady certainty of someone folding a map along a crease they knew by heart. In the sink, the cups left pale rings that wiped away with a cloth. She placed the lawyer's card in a small dish near the stove, wrote the time of their visit in her spiral notebook, and called her attorney, leaving a measured message. Then she stood still. The house exhaled back into its quiet rhythm. Her refusal had not been weakness. It was her foundation. She lifted the handkerchief to her cheek before returning it to its place. The kettle sighed as it cooled. She breathed deeply, steady in the knowledge that some lines would remain empty today. She was drying the cups when a soft knock tapped at the door. 3 light beats like a bird testing glass. Eleanor didn't rush. She folded the towel, moved to the side window, and saw her neighbor Margaret standing there, pie tin in hand, a canvas tote hanging from her shoulder. Margaret lived 2 houses down, a widow and gardener, her gentle voice often disguising the steel beneath it. Eleanor opened the door but left the chain hooked, as habit was its own shield. Apple and ginger, Margaret said, lifting the pie slightly as if offering it on an altar. You looked pale last week. Sweetness steadies the blood. Eleanor unlatched the chain and let her in. They went to the kitchen. The pie rested on the counter and Eleanor poured tea. Steam curled into the quiet air. You had visitors, Margaret said, her tone more observation than question. Clara's husband and a lawyer, Eleanor answered. Papers. Urgency. A pen slid where my hand should be. Margaret's lips pressed together. I saw them come. She hesitated. The lawyer shone the way a knife does when it's been polished too much. I'm fine, Eleanor said. I told them my attorney reads before I sign. That sentence is a roof, Margaret said. Stand beneath it. They drank in silence. Margaret glanced at the folder on the counter but didn't touch it. She treated boundaries the way a seamstress treats chalk lines, with care and respect. Do you know why I bring pies? Margaret asked finally. Because you're kind, Eleanor said. Margaret shook her head gently. Because someone should knock without asking. I know how it feels when every visit comes with a request tucked into a smile. She took a slow breath, deliberate, steady. Years ago, when I was recovering from surgery, my son put a clipboard in my lap. He said the forms would make insurance easier, that he and his wife would manage the bills while I rested. I signed. I wasn't clear-headed. 2 months later, I learned I'd given him power over the house. He borrowed against it. A year later, the bank took the porch where I'd taught him to braid rope. Her voice did not break. It landed firm as a nail set flush in wood. That is why I live alone in the bungalow now. Eleanor's hand drifted to the folded handkerchief in her pocket. She felt the stitched initials, a reminder of another hospital room, another man whose gift had been protection, not a trap. Grief and gratitude sat side by side within her, sharing the same chair. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly. I was sorry for too long, Margaret replied. Now I'm exact. Exact is how you survive once you stop apologizing for wanting to stay whole. Eleanor Ward set her cup down with a firm click, porcelain against wood. They'll be back, Margaret said quietly. Only next time they'll dress the word control in softer fabric. They'll call it support or peace of mind. The hook will be the same. Don't argue. Just let it swing through air until it catches nothing. Eleanor told her about the wedding. The balcony seat, the draft, the heater humming beside her. Margaret's mouth tightened, then eased into something closer to sorrow. They put you where the pictures wouldn't catch you, she said. That's a trick. They'll make you invisible until you agree to be visible on their terms. Don't play along. At least the sky was clear, Eleanor murmured. That's your gift, Margaret replied. A view of the truth. Use it. From her tote, Margaret pulled out a spiral-bound notebook marked with neat tabs, and a pen that clicked with purpose. Here, she said. Write the date and time of every visit. Attach business cards. Record what they said and what they didn't. Paper can be armor if you choose the right weight. Eleanor opened to the first page. She wrote the hour Richard and Daniel's lawyer had arrived, their names, the words general durable power of attorney, and the lines she had spoken back. Writing felt like stitching a seam that had been close to unraveling. Margaret watched, calm as a gardener who recognizes the first sign of green. I'm proud of you, she said. A small smile found Eleanor, one that belonged to a hope she hadn't quite trusted before. The kettle cooled with a hollow click. Silence settled comfortably between them. When Margaret rose to leave, she paused at the door. You're not invisible, Eleanor. Not in this house. Not on this street. Not in the eyes that know how to measure worth. The words settled in Eleanor's chest like a stone she'd been waiting to hold. She walked Margaret to the porch. Crows quarreled in the maple tree. When they return, Margaret said, pour tea. Keep steady. Let your yes mean yes and your no be a door. Eleanor thanked her for the pie, for the notebook, for the steel behind her softness. Margaret left with her measured stride. Eleanor closed the door, set the chain, and placed the notebook beside Jonathan's leather folder. Armor beside armor. Sweetness beside law. Quiet no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like readiness. The next day brought an errand. Ordinary things. Vitamins, stamps. She parked near the pharmacy and stepped into the lobby. The newspaper rack turned on its tired hinge, squeaking as she brushed her hand along a magazine's spine. Through the window, a dark SUV idled at the curb. She recognized the shape of Daniel Carter's jaw behind the glass, and Beatrice Carter's helmet of styled hair. Their voices carried faintly through the closed window, clipped with impatience. Eleanor shifted behind the rack, letting its metal frame shield her as she listened. You went too soft, Beatrice said. She's a widow. Widows sign if you stroke their fears the right way. You should have walked out with signatures. The document was solid, Daniel muttered. But she kept insisting her lawyer had to see it. Beatrice's voice sharpened. And where would a woman like her even find a lawyer? Push harder. Everyone folds if you prod the right place. Eleanor kept her hand moving along the rack, pretending to browse. A cashier glanced her way. She lifted a greeting card as if comparing patterns. Silence had its own armor too. The timing is impossible, Beatrice continued. The florist wants their wire by Friday, the caterer's calling, the venue is holding the deposit. The platinum card's maxed and the rate's gone up again. We can't float another week. Daniel thumped the steering wheel. I thought Clara would help. She hardly tried. She's sentimental, Beatrice said. She'll choose peace until the bills choke her. That's when you'll need to decide for both of you. The newsstand creaked as Eleanor shifted her weight. She froze until the sound was swallowed by the shuffle of a shopper's bag. You shouldn't have left the originals, Beatrice pressed. You let her feel powerful. She needs to feel dependent. Show her the penalties. Press on her confusion. Call it protection. That's the word that works. The durable power is only useful if she signs. Without it, we're stuck with bills and no leverage. Their voices dulled as the SUV idled forward in the line of traffic. Eleanor lowered the card back into the rack, her fingers steady. She had heard enough. I could tell her we needed to bring her accounts together so she'd qualify for better rates. Richard said we could start small, just a few transfers to ease her in. Once I was named agent, the plan was to refinance the condo, fold her under our umbrella, and sweep the slate clean. Beatrice had insisted the bank would approve so long as a principal had property to stand on. Does she own the house outright? Richard asked. I think so, I said. He had told me she lived modestly, kept things simple. There had to be something tucked away. People like Eleanor always had quiet accounts, money left sitting untouched. Then hurry, Beatrice pressed. The interest is eating us alive and the line of credit won't wait. Don't share numbers with Clara, she'd fall apart. The wedding alone was a palace built on debt. A gold leaf cake with no foundation. Heat climbed up my neck. I pressed the folded handkerchief in my pocket, initials R and B stitched faintly. Richard once told me, moths mistake brightness for safety. Debt is the same thing. When you're desperate, it glows. Vendors had already started whispering. The videographer threatened to hold the footage hostage. Richard waved it off. Beatrice said we'd negotiate when the time came. For now, my job was Eleanor. If she signs, Beatrice said, we're clear by Monday. Cards reset, the tide turns. And Clara? Richard asked. You tell her this is planning. You tell her her mother feels relieved. If Eleanor hesitates, remind her about taxes. Fear works better than persuasion. She won't understand the language anyway. Keep it brisk. I stood motionless, as steady as a heron. The words arranged themselves like stones dropped in water. What about the island rumor? Richard asked again. My breath thinned. Beatrice sniffed, dismissing it. Old men exaggerate what they own. Brothers exaggerate worse. Even if she holds land, it's probably snarled in claims. We don't need the whole castle. Just the stairwell. The power of attorney opens doors without maps. Once you're agent, you can move. There it was, the scheme dressed as concern. They didn't see me as family. I was leverage, a hinge to their escape. Love had been replaced with logistics. I bought a newspaper to justify standing still and tucked it beneath my arm. Through the glass, Richard rubbed his forehead while Beatrice tapped her phone, tallying figures. A receipt curled on the dashboard like a white flag no one would ever wave. I'll go back this afternoon, Richard muttered. Bring just the short form, something she can sign with tea on the table. You'll go now, Beatrice ordered. Bring flowers. Widows are softened by gentle things. Use her first name. Sit close. Keep the page where her hand falls. If she asks one question, answer another. Stay charming. They drove off, tail lights punctuating the road in red strokes. I stepped into the exhaust's fading warmth. The map of the islands rose in my mind, wind tugging its edges. Osprey nests here, shallow reefs there, coves that breathed with the tide. Jonathan's handwriting brushed across memory, Use them wisely. Do not feed sharks. I walked to my car and set the basket on the passenger seat. Before starting the engine, I opened the spiral notebook Eleanor had given me. I wrote, time, place, vehicle words. Then I copied down Richard's line, we cannot float another week, and the part about refinancing her home beneath their umbrella. I underlined agent twice. Out loud, just once, I said it so my spine could hear, I will not sign. I started the car, bedrock steady beneath the tide of their schemes. Clara arrived just before dinner, work flat still on, hair tied into the tidy knot that meant meetings. She stood on the porch with a grocery bag of pre-made soup, her smile slipping at the edges. I opened the door but left the chain resting across the frame. She noticed. Looked down. Looked away. Habit guards peace, I said. Clara nodded. We warmed the soup she had brought and sat together at the kitchen table. Mom, she began, I just wanted to check on you. Richard mentioned he and Mrs. Carter brought some papers. He thinks they might make things easier. It's only planning. The word only, I said, is a rug people lay over holes. What papers? Power of attorney, she answered. But only if you want it. Taxes can get complicated. You shouldn't have to handle that alone. I pressed my palm against the handkerchief in my lap, feeling the stitched initials as if they were a small anchor. I'm not alone, I said. I have an attorney. I make my plans in my own time. She exhaled. Richard says consolidation would help. One umbrella, fewer moving parts. You wouldn't lose control, you'd just have support. We could set alerts, track everything. Who is we? I asked. Daniel and me, she said. Family. Mom, it would mean a lot if you signed. I don't want tension between my husband and you. I sipped my soup and set the cup down with weight like a gavel. Clara, can I ask you something? On your wedding day, did you feel valued? She blinked. Of course. It was beautiful. Did you feel valued by those who arranged it? I asked. By the way you were moved like a centerpiece from one pose to the next? By where I was seated? Her eyes slid toward the window. Weddings are chaos. The planner made choices. I didn't see everything. I saw enough, I said. I sat outside under heaters. I clapped when you shone. But I'm asking about you. Did you feel held? Seen? Her jaw shifted. We had a perfect night. She added softly, perfect doesn't need witnesses. You don't have to protect the image with me, I said. She cradled her spoon. Daniel's under pressure. His family expects excellence. He's trying. Trying can be decent, I said. But pressure doesn't excuse control. A document handed to me without my counsel isn't care. It's leverage. Her eyes flared, then gentled. He's my husband. I want peace, not battles. Peace that requires my signature isn't peace, I said. It's surrender dressed as courtesy. I'm asking for help, she said. Help me keep harmony. I can help without yielding myself, I told her. I'll cook dinner, I'll listen, I'll wait while you and Daniel learn to be a team. But I won't place my life under an umbrella I didn't choose. Clara traced a circle of condensation on the table. Are you hiding something from me? Privacy isn't secrecy, I said. My mother kept her ledger in a tin. She didn't pass it around to prove love. I keep my own ledger. That isn't deceit, it's adulthood. He swallowed. Daniel worries you'll become isolated. He says widows are vulnerable. They can be, I said. That's why widows learn to say no. You've always been stubborn. Stubborn kept this roof over our heads when your father died, I said. Stubborn paid for braces for school. Stubborn raised you. Stubborn is another word for staying. She looked at me, then set her spoon down. What if it were me asking you to sign? Not Daniel, me. I'd give you the same answer, I said. I don't sign without counsel. I don't sign what I don't need. I don't hand over my name for convenience. The room stilled with only the hum of the heater. After a while she stood, carried our bowls to the sink. We washed and dried together in quiet rhythm. At the door she hugged me. On the porch she turned back. Mom, she said, will you at least read the short version if we bring it? Bring nothing, I told her. Send it to my attorney. Clara left with a nod and I closed the door behind her, setting the chain across. At the table, I opened Eleanor's notebook and wrote down what was spoken and what was left unsaid. When the ink dried, I pressed the handkerchief with J and M stitched into my cheek, grounding myself in its quiet weight. I want Clara's happiness, but not at the cost of disappearing. Eleanor had suggested the Thursday gathering at St. Mark's. A small circle where the chairs are soft and the tea has the steadiness of ritual. I carried a tin of shortbread and the linen handkerchief, warm from my pocket, its thread an anchor I could hold without words. The sign outside the hall read, Women's Support and Prayer. There were no questions at the door, only the scrape of a chair pulled out for me in a ring already forming. 8 women sat together, their shoes tucked beneath chairs like roots pressing into shared ground. Linda guided the group. She set out a basket for phones, a tissue box at the center, and recited the rules with a voice that left no room for guessing. Speak briefly. Listen fully. Offer advice only when asked. No rescuing. No fixing. What we hear remains in this room. Then she lit a candle and the quiet swelled, shoulders lowering as the silence held us steady. May spoke first, her voice trembling as she told how the utility company misapplied her payment and mailed a red notice. She asked for courage to make another call. Carmen requested steady hands for Friday's infusion and for her soup to taste like soup again instead of iron or cotton. Patrice asked for patience with her sister, who flips day into night, demanding breakfast at 2 in the morning without quarrel. Sunita longed for her back to hold through holiday baking, and for customers to carry civility into long afternoon lines. Nora prayed for clarity in the voices that swing from tender at noon to cruel by dusk, leaving her unsure which is real. June asked for grip strength. Ruth asked for gas money and calmer nerves, petitions shaped like survival but spoken with grace. When it was my turn, I said my daughter married. That I sat on a balcony at the reception, smiling into the cold draft. A week later, her husband arrived with papers, concern wrapped around convenience. They wanted my signature. No one gasped. The women only tilted their heads as though a diagnosis had found its name. Linda slid the tissue box closer, her hand open, wordless steadiness. I told them I said no. That silence felt like armor until Clara herself asked me for harmony. Armor bruises when pressed from the inside. Under the table, I pressed the handkerchief stitches into my palm, and the cloth remembered me when my words wavered. I said I wanted peace, but not the kind bought with my name or bargained away at the expense of my own boundary. Patrice smiled gently. Harmony is honest or it's theater. Music improves when someone tunes it. Nora lifted her glasses. My son calls me stubborn when I am consistent. Stubborn is just another word for boundary. Sunita poured tea and added, do not let anyone rename privacy as secrecy. Generosity does not require exposure to count. June laid her keys on the table. After my stroke, my brother brought a form. I signed and my truck was gone. Now I read every line twice. Carmen leaned forward. The clinic recommends a blanket, but my grandmother's shawl gave me courage no fleece ever could. Bring your shawl, Eleanor. Bring whatever tells your body it belongs. Let that simple truth steady your hands. Linda asked if I needed anything practical. I said I kept a notebook. She told me the church offered a notary on Tuesdays, and that a retired banker sat in the library every Wednesday, answering questions for free to anyone who asked. We ended with a short prayer, then let the quiet close around us like tent poles holding a roof. The room breathed, whole without decoration. May slipped me her daughter's number, a nurse familiar with elder law clinics. She underlined the best one to call. Sunita tucked almond cookies into my tote, the small sweetness wrapped in parchment like permission to rest that night. Carmen marked her infusion hours on a card and said company was welcome. June offered to be nearby on call days, standing guard if needed. At the threshold, Linda pressed my hand and said, "You are not invisible here, Eleanor." The words stayed with me, not floating away like pleasantries but settling into bone. I believed her. The afternoon light did not dim me. It carried me steady, the sky clear and siding with my breath. In the passenger seat, the tote leaned against the notebook Eleanor had given me, pages waiting to hold dates, times, exact words like armor against intrusion. The women had not tried to fix me. They reminded me I did not have to stand alone in the heavy hours. I chose an early appointment so the office lobby would be quiet, my thoughts free to move. The firm sat above a pharmacy, its sign unassuming. The receptionist greeted me by name. My attorney, Helen Park, met me with her yellow pad and the calm of someone accustomed to storms. She led me into a conference room and closed the door. "Let's review what you want," she said, setting the pad between us. "Protection," I answered. "Clarity. And quiet most of all." She smiled gently. "Then we'll build walls that protect without casting shadows." She slid a folder across the table. "Your brother Richard created a revocable trust in your name years ago. We'll amend and restate it. Then we'll move certain assets into an irrevocable trust." I touched the linen handkerchief in my lap, initials J and M stitched there, steady as an oath. "First," Helen said, tapping her pad, "we need a successor trustee. At present it's blank. I recommend naming a professional fiduciary as the first successor, with Clara as a secondary, but with conditions." "Conditions?" I asked. "Conservation and stewardship. If Clara serves or benefits, she must preserve the islands. No sale, no subdivision, no use as collateral. We'll add a conservation easement recorded against the deeds." I nodded. "The soil remembers." "Second," she continued, "a no contest clause. If anyone challenges the trust or its transfers, they forfeit their share. We'll add an interim clause to reinforce it, discouraging anyone from fishing for more." She paused, giving space before she continued. "Third, separate documents. A limited financial power of attorney naming only a licensed fiduciary, not family. Narrow in scope, springing into effect only if you're incapacitated, confirmed by 2 physicians. We'll add a HIPAA release, naming me and the fiduciary so your records are available only to those authorized. And an advance healthcare directive naming your chosen physician, with your neighbor as a support witness, not a decision maker." "Eleanor will bring tea," I said softly. Helen nodded. "And that's exactly what witnesses provide. Presence without burden." She handed me a draft of a pour-over will. If stray assets appear, they'll flow into the trust automatically. We'll update beneficiary designations, title the house to the trust, and record the changes quietly. We went line by line. I initialed margins, asked about verbs. Helen explained why shall obligates and may allows, how in versus or can shift meaning entirely, how durable can give too much in careless hands. Inside myself, resolve paced the edges, testing each lock and latch. With every clause made plain, I felt steadier. Finally, Helen said, "We'll also prepare a letter of wishes. It won't bind a court, but it will guide a trustee. You can speak as a mother and a sister, not just as an owner." I wrote sentences about ospreys nesting, turtles laying eggs in sand, and the tidal creeks Richard had marked with stars. A paralegal stepped in with a notary seal, the kind that looked official enough to change the air in the room. Helen went over the rules of signing, every formality marked with precision. The pen the paralegal handed me had weight, as though it wanted to steady my hand. One by one we signed. The trust restatement, the conservation easement, the narrow power of attorney, the healthcare directive, the HIPAA release, the pour-over will. Each time the red stamp came down, it made a soft thud like a gavel. Not a performance, just law at work. For a moment I thought of Jonathan. He had always favored order over spectacle, and this quiet rhythm would have pleased him. Helen outlined what would follow. The bank would be notified, accounts retitled, deeds and easements recorded without fanfare. A notary at the church would handle one signature so it appeared like any other errand. Certified copies would come by courier in a plain envelope. Originals belonged in my fireproof box. I wrote everything down in Eleanor's old notebook. Dates, offices, each step in its place. Helen noticed the tabs and smiled. "You're already doing the hardest part," she said. Exactness. I told her about Richard's visit, how he had arrived with Gregory and that sharp-eyed man Mr. Crow. How their urgency had felt like pressure disguised as concern. Helen's reply was firm. If they return, I was to give them her card and nothing more. Any letters would pass through her hands. "Boundaries already written need no explanation," she said. "I won't sign what I don't need," I told her. "You won't," she assured me. "And you won't stand alone." We practiced a script for the doorway, words that felt like sliding a bolt into place. "I will consult counsel. Please email any documents. I do not discuss legal matters without representation. Thank you for understanding." By the time I could say it without faltering, my voice felt different, anchored. At the end, Helen brought out a brick-red binder. She placed the originals inside and closed the rings with a quiet snap. 3 small tabs jutted like markers at sea. When she handed it to me, the weight surprised me. Not heavy but certain. Like weatherproofing after a long storm. I carried it to the window and looked down at people carrying coffee cups, boarding buses, disappearing into their day. I didn't feel wealthier. I felt steadier. The binder pressed against my ribs like a book I had waited years to read. At the threshold, Helen paused with me. "You have everything you need," she said. "I had it when I walked in," I answered. Today we gave it shape. Later that evening, when the house had stilled and the kettle cooled, I set the binder on the table. It looked almost alive in the lamplight, red as a heart. I carried my tea outside to the porch. The night smelled of rain. The maple leaves whispered overhead. I unfolded the handkerchief stitched with our initials, J and M, bay blue thread still unfrayed. I pressed it to my palm and began writing. "Dear Jonathan," I wrote. "You would have approved today. The trust is reshaped, the easement signed, the healthcare forms done, the power of attorney limited and safe. Each red seal struck like a gavel, quiet and final. You always told me silence could be armor. I believed you in theory. Now I know it in bone. When Richard brought Gregory and Mr. Crow to my door, I did not argue. I said my attorney would look first. That was enough. The door stayed closed. When Clara pleaded for harmony, I heard the child in her voice, the girl who once clung to my hand. I said no, but under that no lived a deeper yes. Not rebellion. Dignity. And tonight, sitting with the rain's breath and the steady binder, I understood what you meant. They're not after love. They are after leverage. And love, real love, cannot be signed away. The wedding had cost more than pride could cover. I write this so memory stays sharp when guilt tries to push its way in. You always hated debts disguised as duty, and I have learned to hate them too. I remember the map you spread across the quilt, your finger tracing the rookery, the coves, the sand where turtles buried their promise at night. The chart itself rests in the fireproof box, but tonight I carry it in my mind like a lantern. The islands are not just inheritance. They are sanctuary, faithful to tides and birds that never flatter. I renew my vow, I will not sell them. I will not turn refuge into spectacle. The porch light pulled moths close. One lingered against the glass, wings still as folded paper. I set my hand over the old handkerchief and let the day land inside me. The tears came, not violent but honest. I cried for being pushed to the balcony at the wedding. I cried for Clara, who could not meet my eyes when she asked me to sign. I cried for all the years I apologized for existing too boldly. I cried for every woman who opened the door because she was told refusal was cruelty. The weeping eased the way rain ends, quiet with the air rinsed clean. When the last tear dried, I felt taller, not in height but in the bone-deep sense of belonging. I could almost hear your voice, not ordering but steady beside me. Eleanor, you know what to do. Use signatures, not speeches. Boundaries, not noise. I whispered back, agreed. On the porch I wrote a line for Clara. My love is not on the paper. It rests beneath it, as steady as the table itself. I wrote a line for myself. I am not invisible in my own house. I folded the page, wrapped it in the handkerchief, slid it into the back pocket of the binder and closed the rings. The click sounded ordinary. That was the point. I turned off the porch light. The moth drifted back into the dark. The house held its shape and so did I. If you were here, you'd make tea and I'd pretend it was better than mine. You'd remind me that leadership is mostly logistics and love. I am learning now to govern my own small republic. The doors lock when I ask. Meals taste like food again. Grief can sit down without taking every chair. Thank you for leaving me not only land but an idea. Armor, not trophy. Tonight I understand the weight of both. I signed my full name at the bottom of the page with the date and sat until the tea cooled. I didn't need the letter to travel. It had already carried back what I needed most. Authority returned to me. The bell rang after lunch, one clear strike. Through the window I saw Richard on the porch, Beatrice beside him with a bouquet that looked borrowed from a hotel lobby. Behind them, Clara stood a step lower, arms folded tight against the wind. I opened the door, left the chain latched. Eleanor, Beatrice said, lifting the flowers. We brought these. We'd like to clear the air. I unhooked the chain and stepped back only as far as the rug. You may come in, I said. For tea. They filed into the kitchen. The brick-red binder waited on the table. I set down 4 cups. Richard held a manila envelope. Short forms, he said lightly. Just something simple. Streamlined authority so we can take care of things if needed. A signature would ease everyone's mind. Families work best on trust, Beatrice added, her voice smooth. Paper only reflects the love that's already there. Clara sat without removing her coat. I looked at the envelope. Put it down, I said. Richard slid a pen toward me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I lifted a white card from the binder and placed it between us. The print was plain, black letters on white. I do not sign any papers without my attorney. Richard's smile thinned, the corners pulling flat. This is the shorter draft, Richard said, sliding the envelope closer. Your attorney can look at the longer one later. The shorter draft is still a signature, I answered. And a signature is still surrender when I have not asked for it. Beatrice leaned forward, voice honeyed. Eleanor, dear, you are making this more difficult than it needs to be. Control can be such a burden at your stage in life. Let the younger ones carry the load. Control is not the word for my name, I said. It is the word for what you want. She set the bouquet on the counter, petals trembling against the vase. We're offering help. Turning down help is unkind when family is trying to move forward. Help requires consent, I said. Consent is not a pen pushed into my hand. Daniel exhaled, impatient. There are bills, taxes, loose ends, he said. We need authority to keep things orderly. What is untidy? I asked. The wedding, he said too quickly. Vendors expect coordination. The videographer has deadlines. Those are not my obligations, I said. You may coordinate your own. He glanced at Clara, seeking an ally. She looked at her hands, then lifted her eyes to mine. Not peace, not yet, but something closer to alignment than before. Richard tried again. This is about risk management, about shielding you from predatory actors, making sure unavoidable tasks are streamlined. I am protecting myself, I said. And I am protecting Clara from crisis decisions forced under pressure. The crisis is already here. Beatrice softened her tone. You may not understand the numbers, but we do. Let us act. Email my attorney, I said. If you insist on barriers, you will fracture this family, she warned. Barriers are what keep structure standing, I said. A door is not hostility. It is design. Richard tapped the envelope. Will you at least look? I have looked, I said. At the way urgency arrives dressed as care. I folded the linen handkerchief in my lap, pressed its stitched letters into my fingertips, a reminder. Then I turned to Clara. Are you comfortable with this? Do you want me to sign away authority today? Her eyes shimmered. She shook her head, barely visible. I want peace, she said softly. But not like this. Clara, Beatrice warned, her voice sharp. But my daughter did not look away from me. Richard gathered the envelope, though not before I saw the box on the form. Immediate and durable. You brought authority you have not earned, I said. And you will leave with the envelope you carried in. He rose, jaw stiff. We'll consult counsel. Please do, I said, sliding Helen Park's card across the table. All communication goes through her. I will respond in writing only. Beatrice lifted the bouquet and a few petals drifted onto the floor. You are choosing loneliness, she said. I am choosing boundaries, I said. Loneliness is what comes when boundaries are gone. At the door I opened it wide. Richard paused on the threshold. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't understand the risk. I understand perfectly, I answered. The risk is displeasing you. That is a loss I can survive. They stepped onto the porch. Clara lingered. She reached for my hand, squeezed it once and whispered, "Thank you." Then she followed them down the steps, her shoulders straighter, as though a new weight had finally found its rightful place. I closed the door and set the chain. Inside, the house breathed itself back to order. I wrote the time in my notebook, then poured the remaining tea. The attorney's card lay on the table, plain and final. Power had not shouted. It had simply stayed still. Later, after night had settled, Clara returned. Her hair had slipped loose from its knot. She didn't ring the bell, just tapped once against the doorframe and let her hand fall. I opened the door before her second thought could rise. She stepped inside, dropped her purse on the bench. I turned the lock behind her. In the kitchen, she kept her coat on. The refrigerator's hum filled the pauses between words. The clock in the hallway ticked, steady and patient. Clara set a kettle on the stove and pulled 2 mugs from the rack. "Mom," she said, then clapped a hand over her mouth. Her eyes brimmed, then broke open, tears spilling fast and without shame. Eleanor slid a clean towel across the counter. She didn't speak. She simply waited, and waiting gave the moment weight. Clara spread her hands on the cool countertop. "Mom," she whispered again, her voice thin as thread. "I was left out of my own wedding." The words landed whole, impossible to unhear. Eleanor slid a mug toward her. Chamomile, warm, simple, grounding. Clara's shoulders shook. She pressed the towel to her face, and when she tried to stammer out an apology, Eleanor only shook her head. "Crying tells the truth," Eleanor said. "Keep going." "They moved me like I was part of the furniture," Clara said. "Smile here. Stand by the cake. Pivot toward the arch pose by the door. When I asked for 5 minutes to sit with you, the planner said the schedule couldn't bend. Daniel told me to trust the process, that appearances mattered more." She gave a brittle laugh. "Do you know the only time I stood still? When the videographer stopped to change batteries. That was the first time I looked up. I saw you on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. I wanted to come. They pulled me away before I could." Eleanor's eyes softened. "You saw me." "I saw you," Clara said, and fresh tears slid down her face. The kettle clicked. Eleanor poured hot water over the tea leaves. Clara cupped the mug between her palms, searching for warmth. "Since the wedding, it's been nothing but invoices and phone calls," Clara went on. "Beatrice keeps insisting everything is under control as long as I move quickly. Daniel talks like he's managing a company. He says we when he means I. He told me to convince you of things I didn't believe. I did. I'm ashamed that I did." Eleanor let the silence absorb the confession. "What do you want now?" she asked at last. "I want peace that doesn't erase me," Clara said. "I want to sit at a table without auditioning for permission." Her voice faltered. "This morning I opened a drawer and found a spreadsheet labeled wedding float. 3 credit cards, notes about refinancing Richard's condo. I asked Daniel what it meant. He brushed me off, said I misread it, that everyone does this. But I know it's wrong. I know he's wrong. And I'm afraid saying so will split my life in half." Eleanor reached into her pocket and laid a folded linen handkerchief on the counter. Her late husband's, with initials stitched in blue thread. "Hold this," she said. "It belongs to steadiness." Clara pressed the cloth in her hands until her breathing slowed. "I don't want to be the reason anyone drowns," she whispered. "You are not water," Eleanor said gently. "You are a person. A person is allowed to want air." Clara gave a broken laugh that turned quickly into sobs. Eleanor gathered her in her arms. Her daughter's forehead fit into the hollow of her collarbone. They stayed like that until the storm of tears quieted on its own. When Clara lifted her head, the towel was heavy and damp. Eleanor replaced it with the handkerchief. "Listen," Eleanor said. "You don't need to solve this tonight. You only need to remember who you are." Clara's eyes flickered. "Who am I?" "You're a woman who deserves rooms that see her," Eleanor said. "You're my daughter, and I won't trade your name for anyone else's comfort. You can say no." "I want to," Clara whispered. "But I don't know how." "Start small," Eleanor said. "Keep your paycheck in your own account. Ask Daniel for numbers, not promises. Choose counseling if it steadies you. And do not carry Beatrice's urgency on your shoulders." Clara exhaled, long and shaky. "Will you still love me if I stumble?" "I'll love you if you fall asleep at the table," Eleanor said. "I'll love you if you knock on my door at midnight. My love isn't on paper. It's the table itself." Clara rested her cheek in Eleanor's palm. "Thank you," she whispered. They ate toast with butter and honey before Eleanor walked her to the door. Clara stepped out into the night, and Eleanor set the chain after she left. For the first time in weeks, the house felt full again. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Tonight my daughter chose truth." Then I added another line, "Two women stood without surrender." I rinsed the mugs, switched off the light, and felt steadiness settle over me like tide on stone. My phone buzzed with a voicemail transcription. Daniel's voice carried strain, tight and hurried. I pressed play. "Marjorie, the florist's balance is past due, and the venue wants the second wire. The platinum card's maxed. The new rate kicked in. Crow says the short form still needs a wet signature. He thinks we can land it if I keep the tone pleasant. Beatrice keeps saying her attorney will look first. She's not confused at all." My name came up next, spoken as if it were a logistical snag. Paper rustled, a chair dragged. "I can't go back to the club without settling Barton's cigar bill. He already posted photos from the wedding. Everyone assumes I came into money. If we stall, the story collapses. You said you'd cover the bridge on your card until the refinance clears." A woman's voice slipped through, "Marjorie, clipped and exact. Reputation costs more to repair than maintain. Leaders don't ask permission. Decisive sons hold families together." Then the line cut. I stood listening to the silence after, the sink dripping once. "Leader." On her lips it sounded like a coat 2 sizes too large tossed over a boy trembling beneath. It excused nothing but explained the draft. Later that day I passed a cafe and saw Daniel through the glass, seated with Mr. Crow. His knee bounced under the table. Crow's pen tapped wood against wood, quick as a bird. I walked in for water, close enough to hear if I stayed still. "We can restructure once there's agency," Crow said. "One signature, then we roll assets beneath a single umbrella. Vendors paid, refinances move forward." Daniel rubbed at his temples. "She's difficult. Keeps a notebook, writes everything down. I didn't expect homework." Crow smiled thin. "Most widows want relief. She sounds like she's memorized legal scripts." "She has a lawyer," Daniel admitted. "And a brother who seems harmless but isn't." Crow leaned in. "If we don't press urgency, we'll lose leverage. You need a narrative. Health, confusion, travel, paperwork delays. Anything that frames her signature as kindness." "Maybe taxes," Daniel muttered. "People panic over taxes." "Good," Crow replied. "Bring duplicates. Keep her from reading alone." Daniel slumped back. "I promised Clara I'd make this seamless. Told her I was building a future. I can't show her the numbers or smoke. Then don't, Crow said. Bring Eleanor under management and the smoke clears. I left, letting the door close on their scheme. That evening, clouds stacked over the bay like unpaid bills. I tried the word hunger on my tongue and knew it fit. Not hunger for bread, but hunger for applause, for proof of worth. Daniel chased it like a moth against porch light, wings singed by heat. I remembered Beatrice at the wedding, how she directed photographers as if arranging armies, calling it care. In her house, power practiced before the mirror until even the reflection clapped. She had raised a son to confuse pressure with leadership, applause with air. That inheritance had entered my kitchen in the shape of bouquets and envelopes. In my notebook I wrote, "Mirror of hunger." The urge to look solvent when the wallet is hollow. The reflex to borrow a mother to cover a son's debt. I underlined it twice. To see is not to forgive. It is to refuse illusion. Before bed I played the voicemail again. Not for anger, but to take the measure of what had been spoken, to weigh the sound of a man building a house of glass and calling it stone. Daniel feared shame more than debt. He wanted a tale that looked whole even if the sums broke apart. That made him dangerous with paper. He would call pressure protection, surrender peace, and speed kindness. I turned off the lamp and held the handkerchief in my palm. Jonathan once told me that false kindness often wears the mask of help. Tonight I recognized another costume. Hunger dressed as authority, asking for ink. My answer would remain locked. My voice, a key turned once and left unmoved. On a gray afternoon I carried soup to Eleanor's cottage. She answered in a cardigan the shade of oatmeal, smiling as if the sky had not dimmed. Inside, the air carried lemon polish and damp earth. A radio drifted music from another era. We set the bowls on her coffee table and sank into cushions shaped by years of sitting. "Tell me about your day," she said. "I've been steady," I told her. "But steadiness has its price." At night, I hear their plans as if the walls could whisper. Eleanor lifted her spoon, then rested it back in the bowl. "I should share something I often stop short of telling," she said. "You need the whole of it, not the softened version." I waited. Waiting holds panic at bay. "It was the winter after my surgery," she began. "I was weak but grateful. The room buzzed like a hive, everything white and sharp. A kind nurse brought water, told me to rest. Then my son arrived with his wife and a folder. He kissed my forehead and said he'd taken care of everything. Insurance, temporary support, hospital forms. Nothing to trouble me with. His voice was honey, his touch light. He placed the clipboard where my hand already rested. The words looked harmless. Durable, assistance, coordination. I signed each yellow tab. The nurse witnessed. I drifted back into sleep. Her hand touched her forearm as if it still bore adhesive tape. When I got home 2 weeks later, the house was different. He had already been to the bank. The paper was general. Immediate. He'd borrowed against the house for credit cards and a new truck. He'd moved savings, redirected mail. When I confronted him, he wept. Called it a misunderstanding. Said I'd agreed. Silence filled in the rest. She looked down at her soup, untouched. I wanted to believe him because I wanted a son. Wanting, I learned, can become a trap. "What did you do?" I asked. The bank was calm, clinical. They showed me my own name, the meaning of durable. They pointed to a line about accounts. My lawyer was good, but too late. We salvaged what we could. The big house had to go. The mortgage was a harness now. I bought this place with what was left, crumbs on the table. My son stopped calling. When he did, it was to ask for gas money. She smiled faintly. I don't share this for pity. I share it so you won't step into a chair I once sat in. Paper can protect, but in the wrong hands it's a trapdoor. I pressed the stitched handkerchief in my pocket, initials rough against my skin. Thank you, I said. Hearing it matters. There are pieces I still can't say without heat, she admitted. The day I boxed the porch swing. The morning strangers carried my kitchen table away. The neighbor who told me to forgive because men are simple and family is family. But forgiveness isn't a locksmith. The radio played softly. We sat with the silence her story left behind. In her words, I saw my own doorway, a pen waiting for the moment my hand grew tired. I could have said no in that hospital, she whispered. But I was raised to think no was sharp, that women should be soft. I've since learned a new shape. Soft can still refuse. Soft isn't an invitation to harm. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. You are not alone, I told her. Neither are you, Eleanor replied. You have a binder and a backbone. Use both. She left the room and returned with a small tin. Inside were spare keys and a folded sheet of names. My locksmith. A banker who speaks plain. A notary who will come to your porch. If they arrive again, call the notary first. Make them wait. Waiting shows truth. I placed the tin in my bag. Its weight was clarity, not burden. Rain began as we walked to her door, soft and even across the steps. She latched the chain and looked at me like a seamstress checking a hem. I lost my porch swing because I trusted a child who wasn't acting like a son. Don't trust a man who isn't acting like a husband. Trust the paper you sign with your own clear mind. On the walk home I carried her words. If I confused surrender with kindness, I saw where it would lead. Through hospitals, into banks, out of houses that no longer opened for me. I chose otherwise. I carried soup and keys and the knowledge that friendship could be a lantern. In its glow, the trap became visible. So did the path around it. At dusk, a knock came. 3 firm raps, measured like a man marking a wall for a heavy frame. I stood in the hallway with the binder tucked against my side. The porch light was off. The house waited. My palm rested on the latch, the metal cool as stone. Through the peephole, Daniel, shoulders bent, suit too tight. A florist's van idled at the curb. Behind him, the sunset smeared copper across the glass. He knocked again. Mrs. Ward, he called. We should talk. I brought revised papers. It'll take 5 minutes. I did not move. The old habit rose. The reflex that used to say yes before my mouth even knew the question. I let it pass like weather. My hand stayed on the latch, steady. The binder's weight reminded me of the office where Helen Park stamped circles of ink into law. Jonathan's words returned. Armor, not trophy. Eleanor, Daniel said softer now. I have flowers for you. We want to make this easy. Easy. Another costume. Please email any documents to my attorney, I said through the door. I don't review papers without her. Silence, then the faint shuffle of paper against a folder. These are simplified forms, Daniel tried. We only need initials. I won't review anything at the door, I replied. Email my attorney. A throat cleared. Beatrice. I couldn't see her, but I could feel the weight of her eyes, sharp as a lens. We are trying to protect you, she said. You're making this hostile. This is a boundary, I answered. A boundary is not a fight. Daniel knocked again, quicker, lighter. If you don't open, we can't fix this. Fix. Another costume. I leaned my forehead against the wood, letting the grains steady me. On the hall table, Eleanor's notebook waited for the record I would write. The time, the words, the truth. Waiting always shows intent. Your daughter wants peace, Beatrice said. My daughter wants to be seen, I replied. Peace isn't purchased with my name. In my pocket, the linen handkerchief pressed back against my hand, blue stitches grounding me. I could have opened the door. I could have poured tea, let politeness place a pen too close to my hand. Instead I turned the deadbolt. It slid home with a quiet click. I closed the bolt with care, slow enough to hear the click sink into memory. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it's as quiet as a lock obeying its owner. Eleanor, Daniel said from the other side, his voice thinner now, stretched with strain. You're forcing us to take further steps. You can speak with my attorney, I answered steady. Good night. There was a pause. A scuff of shoes on the mat. Paper shuffled. He slid something beneath the door, then retreated. Beatrice's perfume lingered in the air like a curtain. Their footsteps softened on the steps, the van door thudded shut, and the engine carried them away. I stayed where I was, letting the silence seep back into the house. The refrigerator hummed. A pipe ticked as though remembering rain. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's hose smacked against stone. Familiar sounds returned, each one a small reassurance that the house was mine, still standing, still breathing. On the console I laid down the binder. Beside it sat Clara's gift, the notebook she had encouraged me to use when the pressure rose. I wrote what had just passed. Knock at dusk, papers offered, flowers like bait, door unopened, words spoken. I underlined the part about the deadbolt, then slipped the envelope Daniel had pushed through into a plastic sleeve labeled Hold for Counsel. Their urgency shrank into something that could wait. In the kitchen, I rinsed a cup and poured hot water over a tea bag. Steam lifted straight into the dim light. With the mug warm in my hands, I returned to the hall and faced the door as a sailor studies the horizon. Some thresholds protect, some thresholds test. Tonight mine had done both. I choose the lock, I whispered. I choose the key. I choose when the door opens. The house seemed to agree. I set down the mug and felt something inside me unfasten. An old knot loosening at last. Strength isn't shouting. It's the decision to keep one's own night, to let no one turn you into a corridor for their passage. Later I carried the binder upstairs. In my closet, beneath folded winter blankets, I drew out the fireproof box. Inside lay a folder of deeds and a rolled parchment Richard had once given me. I spread it on my desk, loosening the linen tie. The map exhaled across the wood, waterways, coves, and the lines of land we had vowed to keep whole. His careful hand marked springs, shallow reefs, the rookery of birds, stars where sunsets linger longest. I set my palm against the broadest island. The cool paper answered. I'll keep them, I said aloud as if Richard were still in the room pouring tea. No sale, no bargaining, no collateral. These aren't tokens. They are shores. They belong to the tide, to the wind, to the birds that know nothing of contracts. They will remain sanctuary. I traced a channel slowly like a prayer. Outside, a moth tapped at the glass, small and persistent, the sound of survival. My thoughts flickered toward the envelope downstairs, waiting in its sleeve. I felt the temptation to explain myself, to soften the silence with justification. But the map, still and steady, gave its own answer. I owed no performance. Stewardship does not need applause. On a blank card I wrote 3 words. The earth remembers. I slid it into the folder beside the deeds. Soil records without malice. Shorelines change with every tide, but they never forget. They bend themselves around truth and wait for weather to pass. I folded the parchment along its worn lines, smoothing the edges so no tear would catch. I slid it back into its tube, wound the linen cord tight, and closed the fireproof box. The click was plain, unremarkable, yet it sounded like certainty. I pushed the box behind the folded blankets and shut the closet light. At my desk, I opened Clara's notebook and wrote a vow in even strokes. Keep the coves whole, teach her the tides, guard the nesting grounds, pay the caretaker fairly, refuse swiftly but with kindness, reserve yes only for stewardship. Mail the easement to the county clerk. Send a copy to Helen's office. Each line was both a promise and a task. The moth had gone from the window. In its place, my reflection lingered, with dawn beginning to rise behind the maple. I placed my hand over my chest as I had over the map. The rhythm beneath was steady. The house felt anchored. I whispered the vow again, offering it to the walls. The words seemed to rest inside the timber. The land remembers. Helen met me the next morning at the county building. The winter sun followed us up the steps, brittle but present. She carried her leather satchel and the practiced composure of someone who knows how to keep disorder at bay. I had the brick binder under one arm and a tin of shortbread tucked in my bag. The guard at the door knew Helen by name and waved us through. We entered the recorder's office, where light fell across marble and paper stacks. "Today is quiet justice," Helen said. "We file, we certify, we notify. No speeches, just signatures." We sat at a counter near the wall. She set down a stack of prepared documents. First came the amended trust. Then the conservation easement. After that, the power of attorney. Then the letter of wishes. Finally, the deeds transferring my house into the trust. "First, your signature as grantor and trustee," she said. I wrote each letter slowly, deliberately. The notary slid a journal toward me, compared my identification, then pressed a seal into the page. The metal left a crisp impression. Then came the red stamp. Its solid thud landed like a drumbeat in my chest. We moved on to the easement. The language was clear. The islands held a sanctuary. No sale. No parceling. No loans. No extraction. No commercial lodging. Caretaking permitted. Access only by invitation. Helen had included a clause that steadied me. Any heir who tried to undo the easement would forfeit all rights. I initialed each page. The notary lifted the stamp. The letter of wishes," Helen said. "It doesn't command. It guides." I read what I had written weeks earlier, then added a note about the ospreys, and another about bringing local schools to help with shoreline cleanups. I signed, and again came the thud. Calm filled the room like air finally settling after a storm. We recorded the deeds. The clerk accepted the fees, drew the papers under the glass, and stamped them with a steady rhythm. She passed certified copies back to me, the weight of them like a house choosing to sit firm on its own foundation. Helen opened a final folder. "Disposition of residue and successor instructions," she said. "This is what makes it honest." She pointed to a clause. "If Clara one day serves as trustee or inherits the property, she must uphold the sanctuary. She cannot sell, cannot encumber, cannot lease to any venture that harms the habitat." The words sat on the page like a promise carved into stone. I signed again, steady, my letters deliberate as a tide tracing shore. If she ever tried to undo the protection, her share would turn into a gift for coastal restoration. I read the line twice. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a guardrail. Stewardship or abstention, nothing in between. She loves you, I murmured. These terms protect her, Helen said. If someone pushes, she can point to the paper instead of carrying the burden herself. I signed. The notary's stamp landed firm. Thud. We stepped out of the recorder's office and walked 2 blocks to the bank. The manager led us into a glass room that smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. Helen slid across the certificates, the trust's identification, and a letter instructing all my accounts to be retitled in the name of the trust with me as trustee. The manager made copies, typed steadily, and clipped forms together before shaking our hands. Consider your accounts dressed for the right occasion, he said. Outside, pigeons strutted across the courthouse steps like they owned them. Helen checked through her list. Certified copies will reach my file. The county will mail conformed duplicates. Here your stamped easement. Keep it with the chart. If a storm comes, this paper is a seawall. Back at my house, we set everything in its place. I slid the easement behind the chart in the fireproof box. The binder held the certified copies, business cards, and a laminated page with my sentences for the door. I brewed tea. Helen opened the cookie tin and ate one slowly like it was part of the ritual. Eleanor, she said, you've built a fortress that doesn't look like a fight. The truth of it settled in me. My breath aligned with the memory of those red stamps, each thud still echoing steady as a drum. I called Clara and asked her to stop by after work. Helen stayed. When Clara arrived, she paused in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the binder as though it were a lighthouse holding steady against storms. I explained what we had done. The trust, the easement, the conditions that would protect her. She listened, her eyes bright with dignity she had nearly lost. You're giving me a future I won't have to apologize for, she whispered. I'm giving you a boundary you can point to, I answered. If anyone demands entry, show them the seal. Helen explained the clause in clear language. Clara reached out and placed her hand on the binder. For an instant, I saw her as a child tracing maps on our kitchen table. She nodded. I accept stewardship. If I inherit, I'll keep it whole. I placed the handkerchief on the table. Together we touched it, 3 fingertips against thread the color of tidewater. The house seemed to listen. A truck shifted gears down the street. Inside, everything felt level as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The next evening, Clara returned just as the street lamps flickered on. She stood at the threshold as if testing whether the world still allowed grace. I opened the door before she could knock. She stepped inside and clung to me the way she had as a child, running from the playground straight into my coat. She didn't let go quickly. Neither did I. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, her voice breaking. For pushing you to sign. For not seeing you at my own wedding. For letting appearances speak louder than love. I led her to the kitchen. The binder sat on the table like a lighthouse. The handkerchief lay beside it like a banner that wind respects. I poured tea and waited. Waiting is hospitality when words are still forming. She sat across from me. Daniel's mother called after work. She wanted me to pressure you again. She said Daniel and I should act as a united front. Clara shook her head. I told her unity isn't a mask to hide behind. And I told her I won't stand between you and your attorney ever again. How did he take that? I asked. He talked about optics, Clara said. I told him I was done with optics. I'm not a photograph. She let the air out slowly as though each word had weight. I'm ashamed I let the wedding swallow me. I kept promising myself I'd come sit with you after the next picture, but there was always another one. "You're sitting with me now," I said. She nodded, fingers brushing the edge of the binder on the table. "I read the easement," she said. "I accept it. If I ever inherit, I'll keep the islands whole. I won't trade sanctuary for spectacle." I reached across and set my hand over hers. "Then we stand on the same shoreline." She looked at me as if the words shifted something inside her. Tears came, not heavy, not dramatic, just clear and human. "I need a mother who knows where her edges are," she whispered. "And I need you to learn your own edges," I said. "The door of this house is always open. But the paperwork isn't." A small laugh escaped her, half relief, half release. "I can live with that." We ate toast with butter and slices of apple, left earlier on the porch by Eleanor with a note. For courage. Clara said she would meet with the church counselor, keep her pay separate, and demand the wedding numbers in writing. She would not sign anything thrust at her in a hallway. She would not let another person's urgency define her own. "Does that make me disloyal?" she asked. "It makes you responsible," I said. "Loyalty without honesty is a costume that rubs raw." She sipped her tea. "I might stay with you a few nights. Not as a retreat. As a reset. Your room has clean sheets," I said. "And the quilt you've always liked." We carried a spare suitcase from the closet. She packed slowly as if weighing which parts of her life still fit. I didn't narrate my love. I showed it by placing pillows, clearing space on the bathroom shelf, folding quiet into the corners. Before bed, she stood in the doorway of the guest room, hand on the frame. "Thank you," she said, "for not putting your love on paper." "My love is the table itself," I said. "It holds." She smiled, then disappeared toward the bathroom. I sat with the binder a while longer, grateful the law could hold steady while our hearts found their rhythm. Outside, a dog barked, a truck shifted gears on the avenue. Inside, peace moved at a human pace. Water ran. Switches clicked. Then quiet spread like a blanket big enough for both of us. I wrote one line in Eleanor's notebook. She returned without bargaining. Then I set the kettle for morning and turned out the light. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel asking for unity. She silenced it, slid the phone into a drawer, and we never spoke of it. We had answered already. Soil remembers. So do mothers. So do daughters. The next day I set the bee table the way my own mother once did when a day needed to mean something. A white cloth, plain china, 2 cups steaming. The heavy binder rested on the sideboard, not as centerpiece but as lighthouse. I pulled back the center chair and let my hand rest on its rail. I thought of the balcony seat with the space heater humming and drafts sneaking under the curtains. Then I sat in the middle of my own house. 3 light taps sounded at the door. Eleanor stepped in, carrying a bag of pears and a smile that closed the distance of decades in a single moment. She paused when she saw me. "Look at you," she said. "Sitting in your own place at the table." "In my place," I answered. "Not a spare seat. Not an afterthought." She took the chair to my right. Nothing fancy. Curtains open, plates simple, the room arranged not to impress but to hold. I poured the tea, steam rising between us like a blessing. "How is Clara?" Eleanor asked. "She's resting," I said. She slipped her phone into a drawer without apology. "Counseling begins next week. She's keeping her accounts separate and keeping her footing." "Footing is half of freedom," Eleanor said. We ate pear slices in silence, watching the winter sun spread a ribbon of amber across the table. I told her about the filings, the clerk's steady stamp, the conservation easement set down like a shoreline being drawn. Each red thud had its own calm. No spectacle, just law taking root. Paperwork justice, she said, smiling. The kind that doesn't need applause. My hand rested on the folded linen at the center of the cloth. I thought of bringing out the old chart, I said, but left it in the box. I can hold it in my head. The rookery here, the reef there, stars gathered at the edge of sunset. You don't need proof to trust what you've lived, she said. You've sewn it into the day. We talked of small things then. The price of eggs, the neighbor's new dog that howled along with sirens, the church bulletin asking for rose pruners. The ordinary words felt like a room newly built. I didn't have to hurry to earn the right to sit there. Eleanor set her cup down. Say it, she said. I looked at the chair that would never again be pushed aside for someone else's map. I am not invisible. Not today. Not ever again. Sunlight caught the rim of her cup. There it is, she said. How the room knows it too. I breathed and the house seemed to breathe back. I told her Clara had agreed to the condition, that if she inherited she would keep the islands whole. No sale, no division, no mortgage against them. If anyone pressed, the papers would answer before she had to. Stewardship suits you, Eleanor said softly. And it suits her too. Some clothes only fit at a certain age. We drew our chairs closer, not in defense but in comfort. I remembered the planner waving me toward the balcony and calling it quieter. Quieter is not the same as valued. Here the quiet belonged to us. Do you miss the old house? She asked. I miss who I was in it, I said. But I am still her here. A sparrow landed on the sill, nodded at our crumbs and flew on. Thank you for the day you brought the notebook, I said. And the pie. And the sentence about not being invisible. You wrote the rest, she said. I only tapped the line you already knew to sign. We laughed and something long stiffened inside me eased. The balcony chair turned into nothing more than a story I could tell without pain. Will you keep this chair? She asked, touching the rail at my back. I will. And when others visit, I will still sit here. If someone suggests the corner, I'll pour tea from the center. The sun shifted, the amber stripe narrowing across the floor. Evening practiced itself against the walls. Later I walked her to the door. She stood on the threshold with her tote bag and we both glanced back at the table. The chair waited, certain of its place. You did it, she said. Not alone, I answered. She squeezed my hand before stepping into the cold. I closed the door gently, set the latch with the smallest click and returned to the chair. I sat again as though signing the room twice. The house stilled around me, holding steady. Nothing borrowed, nothing owed, only a chair and a woman claiming it. The circle closed without noise. Light settled across my shoulders and stayed. At dawn I walked to the shoreline, the wind lifting the edges of my scarf. The waves unstitched themselves against the rocks and sewed back again with patient rhythm. I didn't ask for a sign. I didn't bargain with the day. I only pressed my palm to my chest and spoke in a voice small enough to belong to the water. Peace is something I choose and something I keep. I will guard what has been entrusted. I will protect what remembers. I thought of the chair at my table, the way light crowned it yesterday afternoon. I thought of Clara sleeping down the hall, her breath rising and falling like a tide that has found its rhythm. I thought of Eleanor's gentle knock, of the clerk's steady stamp, each red seal like a pulse reminding me that quiet strength leaves its own mark. I am not invisible. Not today. Not ever again. Earth remembers. So do sisters and daughters and the homes that shelter them. I brewed tea and opened Eleanor's notebook to write the last entry of this chapter. The date, the clear weather, the shoreline bright, the action taken, mercy chosen. If you sat beside me, you would see nothing dramatic. Only a kettle, a pen, a binder resting where flowers might sit. That is what victory looks like. Not a parade, not applause, but a table that holds steady. If you've ever been pushed to the edges of your own celebration, ask yourself, will you keep standing outside or will you move your chair to the center of your own life? If you've ever been urged to sign away your name for someone else's comfort, remember what I learned at a door I refused to open. No is a full sentence when dignity is on the line. Before this story closes, I would love to know where you are listening from. Is it morning with a warm cup beside you? Or late at night where stories like this keep you company? Share it with us. Every word is read with gratitude. And if this story has reached you, consider staying with us. Subscribe not only to hear more but to join a circle that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for giving your time. Wherever you are, I hope you carry a piece of this story with you. Sometimes the miracle does not knock loudly. It waits patiently until you are ready to open. If you have ever felt dismissed, ask yourself, will silence be your shield, or will you speak to guard your worth? If you have stood at the edge, what will you do to step into the center? Leave your answer. Lend your courage. Take what you need. The door is open. The papers are signed. The sea is listening. Before I close this notebook, I want to leave you with a practice. Choose a chair in your home and claim it as yours. Sit there tomorrow. Breathe there. Make tea, set your hand on your pulse, and speak a steady truth. I am allowed to choose. Write today's date on a card and list one boundary you will honor. Place the card under your cup and let life rest on top. When fear knocks, read the line and hold firm. When kindness calls, open. This is how quiet justice begins. Not with thunder, but with a mother at her own table knowing she belongs.